Oh, Jill said, and I looked up from the book. I followed her worried gaze towards the parking space outside the door. Through the glass walls, I saw a large, plump black man get out of a Ford pickup and slowly waddle towards the door. "What's the matter?" I asked. "I hope they're not going to. You know, rob us," she said, reaching for the can of pepper spray she kept under the counter. "This is racism." I was indignant, only because but I stopped mid-sentence because a man opened the door and walked inside. "How can I help?" I said in a feigned polite tone, which I perfected during the 5 months of living in America. "Mr. Patel," he said in a deep baritone voice. "He's in his office," I answered, pointing my thumb over my shoulder, where there was a tiny room that Parishpai proudly called office. At that moment, Parishpai himself came out of the room. "Oh, you are here, Troy, right?" he said, pulling up his pants with the usual movement. I decided that for his birthday, I would give him a new belt. Troy nodded. "Let's go to my office," Parishpai said, turning around. Troy followed him. I could hardly contain my smile, imagining this huge man trying to fit on a tiny chair in Parishpai's office. The man was over 6.5 feet tall and clearly over 300 pounds. I craned my neck to see how he would sit down, but Parishpai closed the door behind him. "It's just statistics, Savvy," Jill said. She called me Sevi, like almost everyone else here. I really liked my real name, but I hated it when Americans pronounced it as if it reminded them of some Save the Tree environmental campaign. So I started introducing myself as just Sevi. "What?" I asked, puzzled by her words. "Crime statistics. If you see a black man, especially dressed like this, in a car like this, it's scary not because of racism." "Okay," I said. "It's just common sense. Considering how many gas stations in the area have recently been robbed," she added. "Our small, usually quiet town in South Georgia has been tense for the past couple of weeks. A series of gas station robberies shocked our community, becoming a real sensation and the reason for endless conversations in local cafes and at bus stops. This town, where the main events were usually fairs or school sporting events, was known for its low crime rate. The police, as a rule, dealt with minor crimes. They caught those who were speeding on empty highways, and they arrested drunk drivers who were returning home from gatherings with friends. Yes, sometimes serious crimes did happen here, rare murders or cases of sexual violence that were whispered about in corners, or robberies that were quickly investigated. But no one expected what happened over the past 2 weeks. A whole wave of attacks on gas stations swept through our town. 7 robberies, one after another, as if on schedule. They all happened at night, under cover of darkness, when the streets are deserted and the sounds of sirens seem unnatural. These robberies have made each of us wary, especially those who work night shifts. For me and Jill, my partner at Parishpai's gas station, the nights became a time of tense anticipation. Our gas station, lit by dim neon lights, is located on the outskirts of the city, next to a road that is rarely busy even during the day. At night, she seems even more vulnerable. The sounds of branches rustling in the bushes or rare cars rushing past make her shudder. The shelves inside the store are neatly lined up. Chips, soda, packs of cigarettes, and all this can become another target for robbers. Jill, with her red hair pulled back into a loose ponytail and a good-natured smile, now looks worried, her eyes flickering anxiously toward the door every now and then. She tries to appear calm, but her trembling hands betray her fear. We both understand that the only question is whether we will be next. Everything happened so quickly that the city has not yet had time to recover. Surveillance cameras at other gas stations captured blurry images, masked figures, brief moments of panic. People in the city began calling it a nightmare. Police officers who used to sit in their patrol cars are now stationed at gas stations around the clock. But despite their efforts, the robbers continue to operate. "Okay, now that we know he's not here to rob me, you can let go of the pepper spray," I said, pointing to Jill's hand, which was still tightly gripping the can. She let him go. "I have many black friends," she continued to defend herself. "I dated black guys, and my favorite actor too." "I understand, Jill. Sorry. You're not racist. I shouldn't have said that, I apologized, hoping it would shut her up so I could get back to my book. Listen, you're not white. Have I ever been racist towards you? She asked, still looking offended. I thought about her question. No, she never really was racist towards me. Jill was actually very nice. To be honest, a little stupid, and not the most interesting interlocutor for daily communication for 8 hours, but nice. Yes, she sometimes made inappropriate remarks or joked about the fact that I had an arranged marriage, that I never dated guys before marriage, and so on. But it wasn't racism. Rather, it was ignorance and cultural insensitivity, but not racism. Of course not, Jill. I apologized, I said, trying to give my face the most sincere expression. Okay, she still looked unhappy, but returned to her magazine, carefully turning the page. We usually spent our nights like this. I was reading a book I'd borrowed from the library, and she was carefully leafing through the magazines we sold at the gas station. She, of course, had no intention of buying them, so, having finished reading, she simply returned them back to the shelf. Parshbi didn't seem to mind. It is unlikely that those who buy the yellow press thoroughly check its condition. Well, what's new with Angelina Jolie? I asked, hoping that by talking about her favorite celebrity, I could cheer her up. Nothing, she answered briefly. Looks like it will take her another hour to get back to normal. I decided that it was better to give her time for her resentment to pass, and I plunged back into the book. Before I had even read a page, the door to the office opened and Pershpai came out with Troy. Okay, let's go. I'll introduce you to the girls working at the cash register, he said, approaching the counter. This is Jill. Hi, Jill said, smiling a little friendlier, warmed by my remark. Troy, the man introduced himself, nodding to her. And this is Savitri. She is also Indian, like me. But she is not my daughter, Parshbai said. This phrase has already become his standard when meeting anyone from regular clients to suppliers. You can just savvy, I said. Troy nodded at me. Troy will be a gas station attendant on the night shift, Pershpai announced proudly, as if he had just hired a quarterback for the football team. He will also serve as an unofficial security guard. With a big, strong man like him, you girls will be safe from robbers. That's good, I said politely, trying to hide my amusement. This is amazing, Jill added, still smiling wider than usual. Yes, wonderful, isn't it? Pershpai, even after 30 years in the country, has not gotten rid of the habit of ending statements with the question, really? Okay, Troy, you can start work tomorrow. Come at 9 o'clock in the evening, not a minute later. Okay, Mr. Patel, Troy replied without changing his expression. Then he turned around and slowly walked out of the gas station. He slowly climbed into his pickup truck, like an elephant plunging into a pond, and drove away. Is this guy going to protect us? I asked Pershpai incredulously. It will take him an hour to get from the pumps to the cash register at that speed. This is racism. Jill immediately seized the opportunity to get revenge on me. No, this is not racism. It might be weight bias, but definitely not racism, I answered without even looking at her. Savitri Dikra, don't worry, Parshbai replied, adding the Gujarati word for daughter, as he often did. Troy can move whenever he wants. Believe me, he was highly recommended by people who understand this, if you say so, and he will also be a gas station attendant. We have self-service, I said. Yes, if I hire him only as a security guard, he will just stand around doing nothing, won't he? And so he will have a job to keep him busy. During the day, our customers will refuel themselves, and at night with full service, replied Pershbai. Tomorrow, when he comes, teach him how to use a portable credit card terminal, with codes and all that. Okay, I answered. I'll stay the night too. Yes, for safety. Ever since the robberies started, especially after a gas station half a mile away was robbed, Parshpai started staying on night shifts for security. It's funny because he spent most of his time in his office with the door closed, and Jill and I could often hear his loud snoring through the door. A couple of hours passed, and clients came to us one by one. Most simply refueled and left. Some came in to buy snacks or cigarettes, others asked for keys to the toilet. Like many small gas stations, our toilets were outside and could only be opened with keys that we kept at the register. Sometimes I wished Pershpai would just leave them open. According to his logic, if customers come into the store to pick up keys, then most likely they will buy something. And perhaps he was right. It was very rare that someone would simply ask for the toilet keys. Usually, they at least bought some chewing gum. One of these customers bought a candy bar, took Jill's keys, and left. Jill spoke again, apparently no longer angry with me. "Have you ever dated black people, Sevi?" she asked. "No, I haven't," I answered, without taking my eyes off the book. "Oh yes, that's right. You were only with your husband," she said without a hint of mockery. "And I dated black people." "You already said so. Actually, I even have a soft spot for them," she added with slight embarrassment. "Is it true?" "Yes. And—" She hesitated and blushed slightly. "What do you think about Troy?" "About Troy?" I asked in surprise. "In what sense?" "Well, maybe for a short romance at work?" she asked. I tried to imagine Jill and Troy together and couldn't help but smile. Jill was short, like me, only a couple of inches over 5 feet, and very thin. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. I was slim, but compared to her, sometimes I felt plump. And Troy was significantly taller than her by a full head and weighed at least 3 times more. It was just fun to imagine them together. "Jill, he's huge," I said. "I know. It's part of the attraction, you might say," she answered, becoming even more embarrassed. "What about Phil? I thought you were fine with him." "Yes, Phil is wonderful. I'm not talking about a serious relationship, Savvy. Just about a short novel. You know, Phil isn't around a lot." Phil was a truck driver whom Jill had been dating for almost a year. He traveled up and down the East Coast and was almost always on the road. But when he was in town, Jill had a good time with him, and he got along with Nick, her 8-year-old son. Like many young single mothers, Jill looked too young to be the mother of an 8-year-old. "I understand," I said, not knowing what else to answer. "Does she think that I should support her in the idea of cheating on her boyfriend? Well, let's see how everything turns out. Maybe if Troy is good to me, I'll be good to him," she said with a wink and went back to her journal. I returned to my book again. Hard night. I asked Vinit when I got into his car at 5 in the morning after my shift. Vinit put his finger to his lips, indicating that I should not disturb him, and seemed to be listening to his colleagues on a Bluetooth headset. Apparently, he had a conference call with colleagues in India because he then said, "We need to move them to Polaris or Molaris or Solaris," or something like that. I didn't understand his computer jargon at all. 5 months ago, Vineet and I were living in Bombay. We had a pretty typical middle-class marriage. 7 years ago, when I graduated from a pedagogical institute and began teaching English and history to high school students, my father decided that it was time for me to get married. I didn't have a boyfriend, so I agreed to meet the guys he chose. I didn't really have a choice. I grew up in an old-fashioned Indian family where the parents kept a close eye on their daughter, ruling out the possibility of extramarital love, and looked for suitable grooms from our community to marry her off. Of the 5 guys I met, after my father generously gave me the last word, I liked Vineet the most. He was good-looking, had a good job at a well-known Indian IT company, had a large family home in Borivali, and was fun to talk to. My father was more inclined to go for a rich, overweight guy with glasses, but he kept his promise that the final decision would be mine. So Vineet and I got married and started living in his parents' house along with his parents and his brother's family. The family was very nice, and I got along very well with my mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, and 2 nieces. We had a fairly peaceful family, so there were no dramas and quarrels like in Indian TV series, although the family loved to watch the TV series themselves. I went to school to teach, and Vineet went to work in the office. I would return home in the evening, and Vineet usually worked late into the night. In the evenings, I helped cook, looked after my nieces, and watched TV. Life went on quite calmly, with the only major shock 2 years after the wedding, when everyone began to worry that I could not get pregnant despite trying. Several tests showed that I would not be able to have children. I was devastated, but the family and Vineet were understanding, more concerned with comforting me than feeling hurt. This was 2 years ago. Another 5 years have passed since then, and I have already gotten used to the idea that I will not have children. I adored my nieces, and they considered me their second mother. Life with my family was good. But sometimes I wanted to live separately with my husband, just the two of us. We regularly went on holiday, just the two of us, and these moments seemed magical. I wished there were more such moments. I especially liked vacation sex. The sex at home was pretty good too. We did this a couple times a week. But perhaps because of the acute awareness that his parents were in the next room, we could never allow ourselves the relaxedness that we had on vacation. At home, it was like home-cooked food, tasty, healthy, but without any zest. So when Vineet came home from work one day and said that he was going on a year-long business trip to visit a client in America, I decided that I should go with him. Vineet wasn't sure if my decision to go along was a good idea. Of course, he said that he would be glad if I were around, and it would be difficult for him without me for a whole year. But a year-long project on site for a client meant he would be on a temporary work visa. This meant that I, as his dependent, would not be able to work. I'll just have to sit at home and wait for him. I said I don't care. I just had to go with him, and soon we were landing in Atlanta, both excited to be in America for the first time. Atlanta greeted us with its lively rhythm and modern beauty. High-rise buildings made of glass and concrete rose into the sky, reflecting the sun's rays, and the busy streets filled with cars, people, and the smell of street food seemed to breathe the energy of a big city. Walking through the center, we noticed numerous restaurants, museums, and parks, each of which seemed to be part of some kind of colorful mosaic. Atlanta was everything our new home was not. The town we were about to move to was the exact opposite. It was a small, sleepy corner on the outskirts of Georgia, with quiet streets, two supermarkets, and a major intersection that seemed to be the center of all social life. Time moves slower here than in Atlanta, and people seem to know each other by name and stop on the street to exchange a few words. On the one hand, it seemed cozy, but on the other hand, we realized that our new home was unlikely to be a place where we could find the same inspiration and opportunities that Atlanta offered. Then its client was a small but rapidly growing fast food restaurant chain that wanted to make their brand known beyond the state. These restaurants, with bright signs and cozy interiors, attracted customers not only with delicious food, but also with a desire to maintain a local spirit. The NEAT was tasked with upgrading their legacy, its systems to prepare them for growth. This project was a serious opportunity for him to demonstrate his skills and strengthen his position in the company. He was appointed project manager and had to oversee everything from software development to its integration into every point of the network. The move was an inevitable step. Despite my anxiety about life in a provincial town, I saw Vinay talk enthusiastically about his project. His eyes lit up as he described the complex systems he was about to implement and the strategy that would take the client to the next level. I understood that this step was important for his career. Our future home seemed to me like a kind of compromise between the desire to support Vinit and the desire to preserve something of our own. This town, with its quiet streets and rare events, could be a challenge for us, but also a chance to grow as a couple. I had no idea how busy Vanita would be with work when we moved to the USA. Before moving, I harbored hopes that his schedule would become more regular, because American culture seemed to me to be focused on work-life balance. In my mind's eye, the normal 8-hour workday in America promised more time we could spend together, as opposed to the grueling 14-hour shifts that were the norm for him in India. Technically, he was actually around me more often. Now his desk was literally in the next room, and not in the office, where he left early in the morning and returned only late in the evening. However, his presence turned out to be more of an illusion. He spent most of his time on conference calls, immersed in endless discussions with the Indian team. His voice, sounding from behind the closed door, became the background of our new life. Sometimes I noticed him gesticulating while talking through the camera, or looking at the screen with a tense expression on his face, and I realized that work was taking up almost all of his time and energy. The weekend, which I thought was an opportunity for us to relax and explore new places, also turned out to be far from my expectations. Instead of walks or relaxed conversations, we were faced with the fact that many of his Indian colleagues continued to work, and this meant regular calls, discussions, and edits. True, sometimes we still managed to find a little time to go on small trips. We went to the surrounding areas, to lakes, national parks, or neighboring cities, and these moments were like a breath of fresh air. But even then, his phone rang frequently, reminding him that work was never left behind. A month later, I realized that Vineet was right when he assumed that sitting at home all day would be unbearable for me. I'm too used to working. Besides, there wasn't much to do in the small town other than eat and drink, and spending a lot of time in the public library, also gets boring quickly. One day I complained about this to the Patels, the only Indian family in the area, and then Mr. Patel, that is, Parshpai, made me an offer that I could not refuse. He owned one gas station and was looking to buy a second one. He had problems finding good workers for the first one. Most quiet after a couple of months, and those who stayed often skipped work or stole from the cash register. He usually looked after things himself, but lately he had been busy opening a second gas station. He needed a reliable person who could work on the first one. All that was required of me was to work at the cash register with another employee at any time convenient for me and keep order. Naturally, given my visa status, he could not formally register me, but he would pay in cash, like the rest of the employees. I discussed this proposal with Vineet. He thought that I, a former teacher, would be bored working at a gas station cash register, but he didn't mind if I agreed. So every morning when Vineet left for work, he would drop me off at the gas station and pick me up on his way home in the evening. The work wasn't particularly interesting, but it was better than sitting at home. Plus, I dated a lot of different people. Overall, it suited me. Then the first phase of the Bonita project ended and the implementation phase began. Since the client was a fast food chain, they couldn't afford any downtime during the day, even on weekends. Therefore, the only time when it was possible to carry out an update was at night. So Vineet had to switch to night shifts for a few months. Since Vineet started working at night, I asked Pershpai if I could also work the night shift so that my husband and I could be home at the same time. Naturally, he didn't mind, so I joined Jill, who was the other night worker. Jill was one of the few employees Pershpai respected and trusted, and he never had any problems with her. So, unlike the day shift, where I was partly a supervisor, looking after the workers, at night I was a regular employee. So the daytime employees treated me like boss and didn't talk much outside of work, and Jill and I developed a friendship of sorts. Jill worked for Pershpai for almost 4 years. She was very efficient, and with a small flow of late-night clients, we had a lot of free time. So we both spent time together reading books and her tabloids, sometimes chatting about life. Jill was a cheerful and sociable girl. She became pregnant, kept the child, and immediately began working to support him. She lived with her mother, who looked after her son while she was at work. Her personal life, although more eventful than mine, was probably typical of America. Her son's father turned out to be a complete loser, whom she regretted ever getting involved with, and he never took part in their lives. She's had a few serious boyfriends, but nothing lasting. She had been dating Phil, a truck driver, for some time and thought they had a future with him. So I was a little shocked when she mentioned a possible fling with Troy. It's not just that Troy, a big, plump, silent guy, seemed completely unsuitable for Jill. The whole point is that in this regard, I led an extremely traditional life. All my friends were like me. We've all turned down guys' advances in college, afraid of what our parents would think. And I had plenty of courtship. I don't want to brag, but I look attractive. I have a good figure and breasts that attract attention. They often tried to conquer me, and there were guys that I really liked. But my parents instilled their values in me, so the first man I held hands with, kissed, and had sex with was my husband Vineet. Over the 7 years of marriage, Sometimes they also tried to hit on me, especially here at the gas station, where customers and some delivery workers did not miss the opportunity to flirt. But I always kept my distance. When Vineeth dropped me off at the gas station the next night, Jill had already replaced the previous employee. Walking inside, I raised my eyebrows with surprise and a chuckle as I looked at her. Jill and I usually dressed as comfortably as possible. On the night shift, even if your schedule has long since become night shift, you want comfort. Therefore, we usually wore jeans or trousers, sometimes skirts, and t-shirts branded with the company logo. But tonight Jill was dressed to go to a club. She was wearing a tank top that showed off her modest cleavage. She had makeup on her face, and her hair looked like she had just left the salon. The wrap skirt was mini and showed off her slender, tanned legs. And to top it all off, she wore high heels. "Wow, what a sight," I said, approaching her at the cash register. "Too fancy?" she asked with a sly smile. "You look great. I'm sure he'll notice," I said. And at that moment, I saw Troy's pickup truck pull into the gas station. He parked in the back, where employees were supposed to park, and slowly, as if he was about to fall asleep, he walked into the store, looking like a comatose gorilla. "Hello," he greeted, nodding in our direction. "How are you?" "Hello," we said at the same time. He simply nodded and froze as if he didn't understand anything. What a silent man, I thought. We stood in awkward silence for several seconds. "I have to show you how to use the card terminal," Jill said cheerfully and reached for it. "Let's go, I'll show you." Jill skipped out and Troy slowly trudged behind her. Through the glass walls, I saw Jill sending him all sorts of signals. She often laughed, straightened her hair, touched his hand, and stood very close. Even a comatose gorilla would understand her hints. Troy, despite his sleepy appearance, was a man. He seemed to react too, saying much more than seemed possible and even smiling sometimes. "Looks like it went well," I said as Jill came back inside and one of the customers pulled up and Troy went to serve him. "Do you think he likes me?" she asked. "Jill, seriously, look at him. Look at you. He probably still doesn't believe his luck that he even got a chance with you. Don't judge a book by its cover, savvy." The cars kept coming and Troy kept working. Many customers were coming into the store and Jill and I were busy. Almost an hour later, the flow of customers decreased. Troy stood near the pumps for a few minutes, then pulled a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket and began to light it. Jill, he shouldn't be smoking so close to the pumps," I said, concerned. "Damn, it's really not worth it." "I'll go tell him," she answered and practically ran outside. I saw her waving her hands at him and saying something, attracting his attention. He stared at her, dumbfounded. She ran closer, and they exchanged a few words before Troy began to move closer to the door of the store. There was seriousness on Jill's face. She was clearly reprimanding him, and rightly so. Flirting is flirting, but no one will give him any favors for the risk of blowing up the entire gas station. Troy seemed to nod in agreement. He stopped next to the small smoking area near the entrance, a safe distance from the pumps. Jill started to walk back into the store, but he said something to her. She looked at him shyly and nodded. He handed her the pack, and she took the cigarette he lit for her. I've never seen Jill smoke. She never mentioned that she had such a habit. So I was surprised when she smoked so elegantly and confidently, as if she were a regular smoker, carefully holding the cigarette between her fingers. They stood and chatted for a few minutes, and Jill's body language clearly showed that she was back in flirting mode. After finishing her cigarette, she went back inside and Troy headed back to the pumps. "Jill, do you smoke?" I asked in surprise. "Not really. I used to smoke, but I quit," she said, blushing slightly. "How did it go?" He asked very nicely, and I couldn't refuse. She answered, blushing even more. The flirting between them continued all night, with breaks for smoke breaks. I felt awkward being a spectator of this performance, so most of the time I tried to focus on the book. But at the same time, I was very intrigued by what was happening. I have never seen such a game between two people. My friends didn't have boyfriends. Me too. The only way to meet a guy is when your parents introduce you, and I have only seen such games in movies or on TV. It was fascinating to watch this live. I was wondering what the rules of this game are. What will Jill do? Who will take the first step? And what will they do next? Will they go to her house after their shift? It would be weird with her mom and son at home. Although she brought Phil to her place all the time. Maybe they'll go to his house or to a motel. But when the shift ended, they left in different cars and at different times. Maybe tomorrow. I was waiting for something to happen. My wait lasted 3 days. I felt awkward just asking Jill directly, "When are you going to sleep with him?" In the end, part of me thought it was all very wrong. If she is dating Phil, she must be faithful to him. But at the same time, I was curious how it would all end. Only, nothing seemed to happen. All I saw was them talking, flirting, and smoking together. On the fourth night, I finally decided that, despite the awkwardness, I should ask Jill directly. "Jill, can I ask you something?" I finally plucked up the courage when she returned after another smoke break. "Of course, Sevi, ask," she replied. "You and Troy, Troy and you." I stuttered, feeling a little uncomfortable. "Sorry if this is too personal a question. But nothing happens between you, right?" "What?" she asked in surprise, either offended or puzzled. "Well, you see, it's just." I hesitated, feeling awkward. "You said that you were interested in an affair with him." "Well, yes," she confirmed. "And I just see everything. You just talk, flirt, and smoke. Today is already the fourth day. Is this somehow deliberately so slow, or—" I didn't know how to finish the question. Jill looked at me with confusion. "Sevi, aren't you serious?" And suddenly she laughed. "Great joke." I stared at her in confusion, not understanding anything. "Are you serious?" "God, she's serious," Jill said, laughing even louder. And then it dawned on me. She had no intention of having anything serious with Troy. How could she even think about this? He's full and strange. She was just joking about a possible affair and was amused that I took her words seriously. I laughed too. "So you and Troy?" "Yes, of course, Troy and I have already done something," she answered with a grin. "Did you really think that we were just flirting and smoking?" "Yeah. So do you meet after your shift or before?" I asked. "No, silly. During the shift," she said. "During." Oh, poor naive Sevi. So innocent, so innocent. She shook her head, grinning. "Haven't you noticed how often I've gone to the toilet in the last couple of days?" To be honest, I didn't pay attention to it. And even if I did, I wouldn't understand how important it is. "No, I didn't notice," I answered. "Why does Troy always follow me a minute after I leave?" I didn't notice it at all. I was usually immersed in my book. If Jill went to the bathroom, I had no reason to look away to see where Troy had gone. "No," I answered, even more puzzled. "Well, that's it. If we want to do something, doing it in a store or outside is stupid, isn't it?" "There are cameras everywhere," she said, pointing to one of the cameras mounted on the ceiling. "Oh, that's it," was all I could say. "Don't worry, I'm getting mine," Jill winked at me. Before I could ask anything, a customer entered the store. A few more people came after him, and we were busy for a while. When the customers left, Jill did not bring up the topic. Me too. She already answered my question. Yes, she was up to something with Troy. The next thing I wanted to ask was, "What exactly did you do?" But it seemed too personal to me to ask her for details. Maybe she'll tell me herself, I hope. But she didn't. That night, as well as the next few nights, I became acutely aware every time Jill went to the bathroom. As soon as she took the key and went out, I began to look at Troy and almost count down the seconds until he, after waiting a little, apparently for the sake of the cameras, also went there. When they returned, this also happened with a slight time difference, and based on the time they were absent, I tried to guess what they were doing. What were they even doing? Just kissing and hugging? Or maybe something more intimate? Is it possible that it was sex? Hard sex? Who can have sex in a toilet? But then what were they doing when they were there for almost half an hour? I gave Jill a couple of hints, but they obviously weren't hinty enough because she didn't react at all. And I kept thinking about it, almost obsessively. So they just disappear into the closet for a while? Vinit asked with interest when I told him everything. It was Saturday morning, and I waited a long time for him to finish his work call so I could discuss this with him. Yes, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for almost half an hour, I answered. Do you think they're having sex? He asked. Maybe, I answered the question with a question. Or maybe just something like, We'll see, he said, getting up from the couch. He took my hand and led me to the bathroom. About this size toilet? Yes, just without a bath, of course. But something like this, I answered. He led me into the bathroom. He told me the possible options for what they could do there, and we made love ourselves. Then Vinit's phone rang, and he had to answer. Vinit picked up the phone and sat down in front of the laptop at the table. I got up and went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Vinit came to the kitchen, leaned his elbows on the refrigerator, and smiled mysteriously at me. I smiled back and asked, What? Why are you smiling like that? Well, Savitri, maybe we should discuss that big gorilla in the room thing. No pun intended. What do you mean? I knew he was talking about Troy, whom I had described as looking like a gorilla. Back in the bathroom, during sex. You called me Troy. Hey, you called me Jill first, I said, waving the rolling pin in his direction. No need to wave kitchen utensils in my direction. Vinit winked and said, I'm not offended, Savitri. Yes, I named you Jill. You called me Troy. We were just playing roles. Roles? It seems so. But it's weird, I said, wincing. Why is it strange? Our previous games were, well, somehow more general. Boss and secretary, professor and student, something like that. And this is very personal. These are people we know. This seems strange. Good weird or bad weird? Bad weird. Is it true? But you seem to like it, he replied. He caught me. I nodded. I think it's good and weird. Maybe we should try again. And then his phone rang again. We'll continue later, Vinit said, and returned to the bedroom. When he returned an hour later, he didn't bring up the topic, and I left it too. Dinner was ready. We ate and then went to the living room to watch TV. Our favorite movie was The Sound of Music, and we watched it. When the film ended, it was almost midnight. I turned off the TV and looked at Vinit. Vinit smiled at me, stood up and walked towards the front door, walked out and closed it behind him. I was sitting, not understanding what was happening, when I heard a knock on the door. I stood up, opened the door, and looked at Vinith as if to say, Are you crazy? But he said, Hi, Jill. You said your mom took your son to the zoo. To the zoo, I answered, smiling. What zoo is open this late, Troy? Hush. Don't be smart, Savitri. Play along. Okay. Yeah, Troy, they're at the zoo. I'm alone for a while. Would you like to come in? Maybe we should go to the bedroom, Jill. Maybe we should, Troy. And we had sex again. We fell asleep satisfied at dawn, as usual. We spent the entire weekend having sex a lot more than usual, remaining in the roles of Jill and Troy. On Monday, I felt completely satisfied for the first time in months. Something changed in you tonight, Jill said. No, nothing has changed, I replied, feeling the blood rush to my face. Something has changed. Not your hair, not your makeup. You never wear it, and you are dressed the same as always. But something has definitely changed, Jill said thoughtfully. I couldn't tell her that it was thanks to the wonderful, sex-filled weekend I spent with my husband playing the roles of her and Troy. So I simply changed the subject, pointing to the cover of a tabloid. Jill was immediately distracted by this. Later, when she went to the bathroom, I expected Troy to follow her. But he didn't go. And she came back pretty quickly. Perhaps it was just a simple necessity, I thought. But a couple of hours passed, and she never went to the bathroom again, although she and Troy went outside to smoke together a couple of times, and their body language remained quite suggestive. Maybe they were taking a break from their sexual encounters, I thought. Perhaps she had her period. Yes, I decided this is probably true, and I returned to reading. The time slowly approached 3 o'clock in the morning, after which there are usually few customers until the end of the shift. On average, only one customer visited us during the interval from 3 to 5 a.m. "Hey, Savvy," Jill said, and I looked up. "Troy and I are going to have a little change of scenery for our smoke break. Let's take a walk around the block." "Okay, no problem," I said and returned to the book. After a while, a car pulled up and I put the book down. The driver parked right at the entrance, bought a pack of cigarettes and drove off. I looked at my watch. It was 3:20 a.m. Jill and Troy had been gone for 20 minutes. I looked at the rack with the keys. Both keys were hanging in place, so they weren't in the toilet. Yes, and I saw them leaving the store together. This made me a little worried. I decided to check the toilets just in case. They were empty. I took my cell phone and called Jill's phone. The phone rang under the counter where she had left it. It was strange. I decided to leave the store and look around. Perhaps they were just standing somewhere nearby. I took the key to the door, locked it, just in case, and went outside. Our store was located near the I-75 exit, a little away from the city, so the area was pretty empty. On one side of the store, there was a restaurant, which of course was closed at night. On the other side, there was a forest area. I first went to the restaurant parking lot, but it was empty. Then I headed in the other direction. Dense, tall bushes grew along the sidewalk and trees behind them. I walked along the path a little forward and peered, but didn't see anyone. I started to walk back, wondering if I should call 911, when I suddenly heard a sound. And without a doubt, it was Jill's voice. It took a few seconds to realize, but I understood. They had sex on the street. Somewhere among the trees behind the bushes. I sighed with relief. There was no reason to worry, they were just doing it. They'll be back in another 10 minutes, judging by how much time they usually spend in the toilet. I turned around, preparing to return to the store. I took a few steps and stopped. Why did I stop? I asked myself. A voice in my head, sounding both my own and someone else's, said, "Keep an eye on them. Watch how they do it." No, I can't. She's my friend. Just a little glance. It won't hurt anyone. It's going to be weird. Maybe, but good is strange, as Vineeth said. I continued to argue with this voice. In the end, he won. I carefully took a few steps forward and watched them. I didn't want to be caught spying on my coworkers having sex. Then I began to carefully step back, trying not to make too much noise or move the bushes too much. Moving carefully, I returned to the path next to the road. I was really scared that they might notice me, so I hurried back to the gas station and returned to the store. I picked up the book again and tried to concentrate on reading. "Sorry we were so late," Jill said as she walked into the store 5 minutes later. "It's okay," I answered, trying not to take my eyes off the page I'd been stuck on for an hour. A few seconds later, Troy came in behind her. I looked up and saw that he was sweating, as if he had just finished an intense workout, which, in principle, he did. He came up to me, stood next to me at the counter, and pointed his thumb at his mouth as he came closer. Under the counter, there was a mini fridge with drinks for employees' water, juice, soda, etc. He was right at my feet. I could almost feel the heat emanating from Troy's body as he stood very close and leaned over to open the mini fridge. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. True, nothing special was visible there. Troy always wore loose clothes, loose jeans and long t-shirts that reached almost to his knees. The only thing that stood out under his clothes was his belly, bulging out from under his t-shirt. Troy took a bottle of water from the refrigerator, opened it, and drank it in one gulp. Standing next to me, a full head taller than me, pouring water into his wide-open mouth, he looked even more gorilla-like than usual. "Can I have some water too?" Jill said as she walked up to the counter. With the two of us standing there, there was no room for her to go to the refrigerator. I leaned over to open the refrigerator and Troy did the same, only a little later than me, and his big hand accidentally touched me, and I was sure that his touch was accidental. "I'm sorry," Troy said with a hint of embarrassment and removed his hand. "It's okay," I replied. I leaned over and pulled out a bottle of water and handed it to Jill, who didn't seem to notice what had happened. Troy awkwardly walked away from the counter and returned to the speakers. I turned my attention back to Jill. She must always have a compact mirror or something like that on hand. "What are you looking at, Savvy?" Jill asked, and I realized that I was staring at her too clearly. "Oh, yes, nothing. It's just, I like your lipstick." I quickly came up with an excuse and went back to my book. When I told all this to Vinnet, he became even more excited than before. He even canceled a conference call to have sex. I described everything to him in the smallest detail as best I could remember. Over the next week, we developed a kind of tradition. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Jill said that she and Troy would go for a walk and smoke. I waited about 10 minutes, then locked the store and headed towards the bushes. I penetrated through the thickets to my usual place and watched them have sex. Then I told Vinnet about all the details, and our intimate life improved beyond recognition. One day, a couple of hours before my shift started, Pershbahai called me. "Jill took the day off today," he said. "You will be alone at the checkout." "Will there be Troy?" I asked, a little disappointed, thinking that she and Jill could spend the night somewhere together. "Yes, he will. I won't leave you alone all night, child," he said and hung up. When the shift started, Troy and I exchanged only the usual greetings and nods. We didn't really communicate much before. I didn't smoke, so I couldn't join him on his smoke breaks. I just minded my own business and read a book while Troy kept an eye on the gas pumps. At 3 o'clock in the morning, out of habit, I looked outside, expecting to see Jill and Troy getting ready for their traditional walk with cigarettes and stuff. But then I remembered that Jill didn't come today, and that wouldn't happen. I returned to the book when the door opened. Troy looked inside and said, "I'll be gone for a couple of minutes." I nodded. He nodded too and leisurely headed in the direction where he and Jill usually went every evening. Only today Jill was not with him. This puzzled me. Why did he go there alone? Maybe he really just went to smoke and stretch his legs. I decided that he would return soon. 15 minutes passed, but he still did not return. This puzzled me even more. What's happening? I wondered if it was possible that Jill, despite taking the day off, still decided to meet him for their late-night rendezvous. Maybe now they were among those trees, having sex as usual. Or maybe Troy invited some other woman. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to find out what was going on there. I locked the store and headed to their usual place. She made her way through the bushes and carefully, squatting, moved along the usual route. When I reached the place where I usually stopped, I looked ahead to where they usually were between the trees. But it was empty. Confused, I was about to turn back when I suddenly heard a voice nearby. "Are you here?" I turned my head and saw Troy sitting on the ground near a bush 5 feet away from me. I couldn't find the words. "I waited," he said. "What?" I asked. "I've been waiting for you to come," Troy said, looking at me with piercing eyes. "I was just looking for you, for help, with boxes, with chips I managed to get out. And when I came up with the story, I continued confidently, 'I need your help getting boxes of chips out of the pantry.'" "No, it's not like that," he said calmly. "Yes, that's true," I replied, intending to stick to my version. Troy put his palms on the ground, stood up a little, and sat closer to me. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I know, Savitri." He almost pronounced my name correctly. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to take control of the situation. "I know you're watching," he said. "Nonsense," I replied. "Fine. Someone is watching. Every evening. I know this for sure. It's too dark to see who it is. But I had a hunch. It turned out to be true," Troy said with the confidence of a prosecutor presenting his final case. I didn't know what to say. I panicked and was in an awkward position, squatting so that my face was sticking out a little from behind the bushes. Troy, on the contrary, sat quite relaxed, not taking his eyes off me and as if waiting for my answer, like a prosecutor during an interrogation. Well, maybe, sometimes. I had a hard time coming up with any plausible explanation. Sometimes, maybe, no, it's every evening. Definitely, Troy said. Those were the longest sentences I've ever heard him say. But his voice remained calm and sleepy, like that of a man who can barely be woken up. Troy, shut up. I blurted out too loudly, hoping that the pressure would help me hide my confusion. He frowned and moved even closer to me, so that his face was very close to mine. He was clearly annoyed, and with good reason he caught me red-handed, and I was the one who behaved aggressively. "Why?" he asked calmly. "Why? Are you asking why I say shut up? Or why am I?" Watching. I fell silent in confusion, not knowing how to finish the sentence. "Why?" I shifted restlessly from foot to foot. "You see, my husband and I started, but didn't finish the sentence. Troy's face, which was already closed, leaned even closer to me, and he kissed me. I wanted to resist and scream. I wanted to break free and run away. I wanted to do 1,000 things. But at that moment, immersed in my first kiss with someone other than my husband, in a forbidden kiss with a colleague who was also the lover of another colleague, I could not move. A thought flashed through my mind. This is much hotter than any kiss with Vineet. Blaine's. As soon as his name flashed through my thoughts, I came to my senses, and she pulled back. Troy remained where he was, looking at me intently. I looked at him for a few seconds, catching my breath. My eyes must have alternated between confusion and panic. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, although it was no more than 5 seconds, I stood up. I turned and quickly walked out of the bushes, hoping Troy wouldn't follow me and grab me again. But he didn't follow me. A few seconds later, I was already out of the bushes. I ran as fast as I could, like a sprinter, towards the gas station. She opened the door, walked behind the counter, and stopped, blushing and breathing heavily. What just happened? Why did he kiss me? Did he force me? Or not? How could I let this happen? I am happily married. I love my husband. No! Stay outside. Don't go in, I shouted when I saw Troy open the door and try to enter. "Savitri, it's okay," he said calmly. "This is serious," I said. "No, not serious," Troy answered. "I'm married. Happily married," I said in such a high-pitched voice that it cut even my nerves. "Yes, I know," he replied. "Don't ever do that again," I said. He said nothing. He stood a few steps away from me across the counter and looked at the floor. We were both silent for several minutes. "It's not just me," he finally said. "What?" I asked. "It was not only my initiative. You also responded to the kiss." He continued. "Shut up, Troy. I didn't kiss you back." "Just shut up," I said, raising my voice again. "I'll be outside," Troy said back and walked out of the store. I angrily looked after him and continued to look through the glass wall, even when he stopped near the speakers. The next morning, Vineet didn't ask me what I saw because he knew Jill had taken the day off. I opened my mouth several times to tell him what happened, tell him about the kiss, apologize, maybe even quit. But for some reason I didn't. This was a completely new situation for me. I never had to admit anything to Vineet. I've never done anything wrong, and even now I wasn't sure if I had done something wrong. If I tell, maybe Vineet will take it too painfully. I was racked with guilt and confusion all day until we finally fell asleep after lunch. When I woke up at 7 in the evening, I saw that Vineet was already getting ready. It took me a few minutes to figure out whether this kiss with Troy really happened or was it a dream. When I realized this was true, I began to dread going to work and seeing Troy again. "Please, Savitri, Dikra," Pershpai said over the phone. "You have to go out tonight. Jill won't come today either." "But Pershpai," I objected. I called, hoping to avoid work. "Please, who am I going to find this late? I would go myself, but I'm in Savannah on business." "Maybe someone from your family." "There's no one. Please." at least until midnight. After that, if you still feel bad, just close up and go home. But you understand how important the flow of customers is from 10 to 12. Okay, Pershpai, I answered reluctantly. He was kind to me, took a risk by hiring me. I couldn't help but respond to his requests, especially when in fact I didn't have any headaches. From the moment Vineeth dropped me off at work, I was on pins and needles. Troy was there, but he acted normal, as if nothing had happened. I opened the book and tried my best to concentrate on it while Troy refueled the cars outside. I was grateful when clients came in because it was a distraction at least for a little while. But most of the time I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. My mind seemed to be in a loop, replaying that kiss in my head over and over again. The more I remembered it, the more clearly I realized that along with the feeling of guilt, I was experiencing something like excitement. Part of me felt like I was getting turned on by how good that kiss was when it actually happened. It was a hopeless situation. Every time I looked at Troy from the outside, my heart pounded and my guilt intensified. The night had barely passed midnight, and I was already in complete confusion, almost in a state of panic. Even clients started noticing and asking if I was okay. In the end, I couldn't stand it. I needed to be alone with myself. I took the key to the toilet and went there to try to sort out my thoughts. Okay, Savitri, be rational, I told myself. There's no point in being so worried. You just kissed a guy. It just happened. You didn't mean it. So what if you responded and felt excited? You've never kissed another man. It's natural to feel excited. The main thing is to keep it in perspective. It was just a kiss. But was it just a kiss? I asked myself. It seemed like something more. Yes, because this is the only time you kissed someone other than Vineeth. But don't get too hung up on it. It was a strange situation. It was dark, you were outside, you were caught off guard, and you just got carried away. It probably wasn't as wonderful as you think, since you're replaying it in your head over and over again. Maybe you just need to kiss him one more time to blow off some steam. What? Should I kiss him again? How will this solve the problem? This will solve the problem because you're putting too much on it. Look at him. He's just a fat, clumsy guy. There is nothing attractive about him. Kiss him again in full light and you'll realize it's normal. Yes, maybe that's a good idea. Just to blow off some steam. And do it quickly before you change your mind. Having gathered my courage, I left the toilet and headed towards the exit. There were no customers and Troy stood at the door, smoking a cigarette. I walked up to him decisively, clutching the key in my hand. He looked at me, exhaling smoke in confusion, noticing the strange expression on my face. What? He asked. I need to let this out, I said in a practiced voice. Why what? Looking at his face, my resolve weakened for a moment, but I reminded myself to let it out. I took a couple more steps until I was right in front of him. Then I stood on tiptoe, closed my eyes and pursed my lips, waiting for him to kiss me. Savitri, I don't think. He began, but I had already made up my mind. I pulled away from the kiss, slipped out of his arms, and took a couple of steps back, trying to catch my breath. Are you okay? He asked. I nodded. We were both silent, and I returned to the store. My mind went from a state of chaos to complete emptiness. I wanted to let it out, but ended up with overwhelm. My consciousness seemed to turn off, and I sat down at the counter, looking into nothingness in front of me. I don't know how much time has passed. I only woke up when one of the clients asked for a pack of Camel Lights. I mechanically took the packet, handed it to him, took the money, and did not answer when he wished me good night. He left, and I again stared at one point. I couldn't even put my thoughts in order. There was too much to process. The only thing I felt over time was that I needed to go to the toilet. Just to the toilet, and not to distract from something. As if in a trance, I took the key, went to the toilet, sat down, did my business, and washed my hands. And then I heard a knock on the door. I opened the door and saw the large figure of Troy in front of me. We both looked at each other for a few seconds. He then carefully pulled the door towards him, and I allowed him to open it. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Then he hugged me and started kissing me again. "I'm hungry, let's eat," Vineet said and left the bathroom. I cleaned myself up and followed him. A few minutes later, we were sitting at the dinner table, dressed and silently chewing, kissing each other from time to time. I wondered if Vineet had noticed something. It turned out yes. After some time, he said, "I noticed. You called me Troy a lot more today." I didn't answer. "You also said a lot more obscenities," he added. "So what? You didn't like it?" I asked. "No, just ... interesting ... you're really into this role." "Really? And you, by the way, switched from Jill to Savitri in the middle of the process," I replied. "Really? Are you sure? Don't pretend you didn't notice." "Hmm," he said and continued eating. I sighed with relief, realizing that I had managed to turn the conversation in his direction and avoid admitting to what had happened. "It's not like anything serious happened. Troy came into the closet last night, hugged me, and started kissing me again. I responded to his kiss. I can't do this, I can't do this." "Okay," Troy said calmly. "I'm married, I love my husband." Now I was almost screaming. "Yes, I understand," he said. He took another step and simply walked past me to the door. He opened it and left without saying a word. I burst into tears in the toilet, choking on the guilt of how far I had gone. I shuddered to think how far I could have gone if I hadn't stopped. I cursed myself for this stupid idea of letting it out, as if I was under some kind of obsession. Fortunately, I managed to break out of this state. I washed my face and returned to the store. Troy was near the gas pumps. Luckily, he stayed there all night and didn't come near me. I spent the rest of my shift mentally chastising myself for almost cheating on my husband. Well, in a way, I had already cheated on him by kissing Troy, but I would have been destroyed if I went any further. Such a wonderful person blames me. Why would I risk my marriage for some random fat guy? When Vinnet came to pick me up in the morning, I had already worked myself up to the extreme with a feeling of guilt, but also with a new wave of awareness of what a wonderful person he was. So when we got home, I almost attacked him. "You know, I hope you don't take this role-playing cross-dressing seriously," Vineet said as he put his plate in the sink after dinner. "What do you mean?" "Well, I'm not the kind of man who wants to share his wife with another man." "Of course. What man would want to?" I was surprised. "There are men like that. Forced husbands. I just don't want you to think I'm one of those," he said. "I know you're not like that, Vineet. But I admit that I like to fantasize about someone else making love to you," he said. "What?" I said, really surprised. "Do you know why I moved from Jill to Savitri when we were making love? Because I imagined that I was another man, Troy, making love to you." "But you said you didn't." "Yes, that's the point. For me, it's just a fantasy. I like to imagine someone else having sex with you or imagine you imagining me to someone else. But rest assured, it's only a fantasy." "Got it," I replied, understanding his thought. "I would never share such a perfect woman," he said, putting his arm around my shoulders and kissing me. "With no one in the world." This conversation once again confirmed that I could not allow the mistake I made last night to be repeated. If Vineet finds out how far I have gone, he will go crazy. If I had gone any further, he would have killed me. I just had to end it. Never think about kissing Troy again, and when Jill returns, don't peek at them. Now it will just be me and my books. That night when I arrived at the gas station, I was relieved to see Jill behind the counter. Thank God she's back. Now Troy could focus all his attention on her and leave me alone. I greeted her with overenthusiasm, which surprised her. "It's good to see you, Sav," Jill said, reacting awkwardly to my hug, which she was not used to. "I'm so glad you're back," I said, releasing her. "Couldn't do without me, huh?" she laughed. "You have no idea." That night, everything seemed to go back to normal. Troy seemed to take my resistance from last night for granted and turned his attention back to Jill. They took a break several times, perhaps to catch up, and disappeared into the trees 3 times. I happily ignored them and focused on the book. The night passed peacefully, and I was happy that everything was back to normal. The following nights also went the same way, and I almost forgot my kisses with Troy, as if it was just a bad dream. Patel wants to see you in his office, Jill said, without taking her eyes off the newspaper, when I arrived from my shift about a week later. Is he here? I asked, surprised. Yes, in the office, she replied. I was surprised. Pershpai rarely appeared at night since Troy started working. He had been away a lot lately, traveling to Savannah on business related to his other gas station. Even when he was in town, he had never called me into his office before. I knocked on the door. Savitri, yes, please come in. I noticed that he did not call me the usual Dikra, as usual. Perhaps I just forgot. Please close the door and sit down. I walked in and saw Pershpai intently looking at the computer screen, his hand on the mouse. I closed the door and sat on a chair in the small office space as he asked. Just a second, he said. I sat in silence for several minutes while he continued to do something on the computer. Okay, ready. Yes, Pershpai, I asked, smiling politely. So, Savitri, how are you doing? He asked, smiling widely. Again, the absence of Dikra, and my sixth sense suddenly became tense. Everything is fine. Do you like your work? Yes, I like it. How's Vinit? He's okay too. Working a lot, huh? Very tired after work? Yes, he is often busy. I was curious where this was all going. How are things going with you and him? I mean, in your marriage, he asked. What do you mean? Are you happy in your marriage? Are you happy with him? Yes, I'm very happy with him, I answered, completely confused. Does he make you happy? Yes, he makes me happy. And satisfies? Pershpai paused and then grinned suggestively. I remained silent and frowned. Well, does he satisfy you? Pershpai, I don't understand what has come over you. What kind of questions are you asking? I answered, not hiding my indignation. This is a simple question, Savitri. Does your husband satisfy you? Why are you asking me this? Because he doesn't seem to do it. What? I screamed, getting up from the chair. If he satisfied you, you wouldn't have an affair with another man. What nonsense, Pershpai. I am a happily married woman. I'm leaving, I said sharply, pushing my chair back. I turned to go out and slammed the door, but he said, Is this what a happily married woman does? I turned around and saw that he was turning the monitor screen towards me. The screen shows a black and white, grainy image, as is the case with CCTV footage. It was recorded from a camera installed in the store and aimed at the counter, capturing part of the area in front of the glass door. Troy stood at the door, smoking a cigarette. Then I appeared in the frame. I stood on my tiptoes and reached for his face. After a couple of moments, I pulled his face down and kissed him. The recording showed how long this kiss lasted. I can explain everything, I muttered, removing my hand from the doorknob. I don't think there's any need to explain, he said. You're dating Troy. No, it was a mistake. A mistake? So you accidentally pulled his face in and kissed him for almost 2 minutes, Pershpai said, as if asking a question in court. No, it's a long story. You see, Jill and Troy. Jill? There's no need to drag the poor girl into this. She didn't even work that night. No, but the point is that it's Jill and Troy who are having an affair. What nonsense, it's you and Troy. Now I understand why, when I said Jill wouldn't be there, you immediately asked if Troy would be there. Please, I swear it was a stupid mistake, an isolated incident. An isolated incident? He reached for the mouse. I opened another file, and I saw a recording of me locking the door and leaving. This was a recording from the first night Jill didn't show up for her shift. You shouldn't close the store, even if it's to have sex with your boyfriend somewhere. I didn't have sex with him. Really? Then why are you leaving? He moved the cursor to the media player. For a full 15 minutes, and he returns right after you, and you seem to be sorting things out. Shall we sort things out? Please, Pershpai. I faltered and fell silent. I glared at him for several seconds and finally said, in any case, it's none of your business. Isn't it any of my business? When you leave my store closed, depriving me of income to meet your lover, it concerns me. I don't have to explain anything to you. I'm leaving. Consider this my dismissal, I said arrogantly, standing up. Resign if you want. I don't care. I will still call Vineet and show him this video, Parshpai said, playing his trump card. No, I replied, the arrogance disappearing from my voice. Don't do this. Why not? Poor guy works tirelessly, and his wife seems to be allowing Troy to take advantage of her, and an ex-convict at that. Ex-prisoner? I asked, recoiling in horror. Yes, that's why he's so qualified to work the night shift. He's been in prison more than once. He's reformed now, of course, but isn't it a bold move to let an ex-con take advantage of you? He didn't. He didn't sleep with me at all. So what did you do when you left? Locking up the store? Or when you disappeared again for a long time? Play cards? Parshpai asked in a threatening tone. No, that wasn't the case. Shut up. I've been putting up with your excuses for too long. Sit down. Parshpai raised his voice. I obediently sat down on the chair. You don't want your husband to see all these recordings, do you? No. Then you understand that I need something in return. I will work for you for free, I replied, trying to appeal to his commercial interests. Come on. You understand that this is not what I want. What then? I'm an old man, but I have my needs, he said with a wink. Pershpai, please, I said in horror. Oh, don't play innocent. Your name may be Savitri, but as we both know, you are not Sati Savitri. I had nothing to answer. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Oh, don't make this crying drama, he said. Stop acting like your honor is on the line. All I ask is what Troy gets. But Troy didn't. I don't need to know what exactly is going on between you and Troy. All I need is you. For one night. I can't. Please, Pershpai, believe me, I never slept with Troy. We just kissed a few times. Several times. And at first you said that it was an isolated incident, he said with triumph in his voice. Please, don't do this. I'll do whatever you want. Anything else, I said, hoping for his mercy. Savitri, this conversation has reached a dead end, he said, wearily rubbing his forehead. Let me make it simple. You will do what I want, and you know what I'm talking about. One night, tomorrow night. After that, I will delete the files. If you refuse, I will show all the records to Vineet. The decision is yours. Please. Enough of these please. They won't help. Tomorrow night, at the same time, I will be here. I want you to come in a sari with a sleeveless blouse. No pants or t-shirt. In a beautiful, sexy sari. If I see you in a sari, I will take this as your consent. If not, well, Vineet will take you to the office and show him the records. But Pershpai, you can go, he said with a note of finality in his voice. I stood up and walked out, feeling as if an atomic bomb had dropped on my life. The tension on my face must have been obvious because Jill immediately noticed it and asked, Are you okay, Savvy? You look like you saw a ghost. Everything is fine, I replied, walking behind the counter. What did he tell you? Did he do something? Jill began to worry. No, Jill, everything is fine. Please mind your own business, I replied in a harsh tone, which I immediately regretted. Jill looked stunned because I had never talked to her like that before. She seemed about to say something, but held back. We both got to work serving customers without speaking to each other. But I couldn't stop thinking about the catastrophic trap I'd found myself in. What should I do? If I refuse to meet Pershpai halfway, he will show all the notes to Vineet, and Vineet will most likely think that I slept with Troy. My long absences from camera footage showed this clearly. On the other hand, if I give in to Pershpai, I almost felt sick at the thought for many reasons cheating on my husband with a man much older than me, whom until that moment I considered a kind uncle. Besides, he was fat, bald, and ugly. How can I do this? Will Vineet believe me if I tell him the truth? Maybe he would believe it if I told everything right away. But I kept him in the dark for over a week. Why would he trust me now? This is my punishment for recklessness and stupidity. Maybe I don't have a choice. But even if I close my eyes and give in to Pershpai for one night, will it all end? He talked about one night, but what's stopping him from blackmailing me again? How do I know it's really just going to be one night? I entered the office, closed the door behind me, and, folding my hands on my chest, asked Pershpai. What? He said, looking up from the screen. If I agree to what you want, how do I know it will be one night? What if you demand it again? I said. I give you my word. It will only be one night. But how can I be sure? Do you have a choice but to trust me? He said irritably. Just get back to work. I'm not in the mood for this nonsense. You heard me before. Either you show up in a sorry tomorrow or you don't. The choice is yours. But how do I? How? There's no way. You just have to take my word for it. Now get back to work, Savitri, he said, standing up. I'm going home so you don't bother me anymore. I sighed and turned to leave. Oh, and I forgot. Don't forget to wear a Mangal Sutra, as required by Sati Savitri. For the rest of the night, I could barely concentrate on what was happening around me. Luckily, Jill was still upset with me, so I didn't have to talk to her. After a couple of hours, there were very few customers. I went over my options again and again, weighing the possible consequences of each. When Vineet came to pick me up, he was already on the phone in a Bluetooth conference call. He stayed busy for a couple of hours after we got home. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. I was distracted all day, and while Vineet was sleeping, I tried to find a way out of this situation, agonizing over my capabilities. Wow, you look so hot, Vineet said as I got dressed and left the bedroom. Sorry, is this a special occasion that I don't know about? No, I just missed the sorry. So I decided to wear it today, I said, repeating the phrase that I had rehearsed 100 times while deciding to take a chance with Pershpai. Why are you so sad? He asked, excitedly. I just really miss India. I miss home, I said sincerely. It's a pity that I came to America at all. Oh, everything will be fine, Savitri, Vineet said, hugging me and kissing me tenderly. A few more months, and it will all be over. I love you, Vineet. I love you too, Savitri. When Vineet dropped me off at work, Pershpai was standing at the door. He smiled and waved to Vineet, who waved back. I watched Vineet drive away and thought, well, the die is cast. As I entered the store, Pershpai turned and went to his office. I followed him. He only noticed me when he walked up to his desk and turned to me. What? He asked. Well, I'm here, I said with desperation in my voice. So what? Go outside and help Jill at the checkout, he said mysteriously. I headed to the cash register. Jill looked at me with surprise, probably very curious about why I was wearing a sari, but the resentment from the previous night still lingered. Jill, I'm sorry I was rude to you, I said, trying to make peace with her. Aha, she replied, still offended. Please forgive me. Okay, she said dryly. I knew Jill. She holds a grudge for a long time, but if she receives an apology, her anger will melt within a few hours. Of course, I didn't know what would happen tonight. To be honest, I expected that there would be no one at the gas station. I was sure that Pershpai would give them a day off, then take me to his office and do whatever he wanted with me. But clearly, this was not part of his plans. I went back to work, serving customers and waiting for the end to come. Savitri, Pershpai suddenly said in a concerned voice, approaching the cash register. Vineet just called me. Is it true? I said, suddenly nervous. Why didn't he call me? He said he thought he left the stove on at home. What? I asked, confused. Why would Vineet leave the stove on? He doesn't even boil water. Yeah, he thinks he forgot to turn off the stove. He asked me to take you home and check on you. And then it dawned on me. It was an excuse to get me away from the gas station, so that neither Troy nor Jill would suspect anything. Okay, I said hesitantly. Come on, let's go quickly, he said, almost running out the door. I looked at Jill. Her face expressed surprise and disbelief. Even she couldn't believe what had happened. If Vineet had left the stove on, he would have called me. I'm sure she suspected something. But I had no choice. I walked out the door and got into Pershpai's car. Obviously, Vineet didn't call, he said, baring his teeth as he pulled out of the gas station. Suddenly, I said sarcastically. So don't worry about the stove, he said. Pershpai, I agreed to what you asked, and I trust your promise that it will be just one night. But if you expect me to bring you to my house and to my bed— Oh, shut up, Pershpai interrupted me. I'm not going to go to your house. Oh, okay, I replied and fell silent. 10 minutes later, I stood in the small, dingy lobby of a cheap motel. Pershpai was talking to the receptionist while holding cash in his hand. I mentally thanked the stars that he didn't choose an Indian-owned motel. The sight of us walking into our room together would have reverberated throughout our small Indian community. Come on, Savitri, Pershpai said, placing his hand on my bare arm. I winced at his touch, realizing that I would have to endure much more. As we walked to the elevator, I noticed the receptionist looking at us with barely concealed surprise. A strange old man with a young, attractive woman. Of course he was surprised. We went up to the third floor. As we walked out, I noticed an older man hugging a young woman near the ice machine. They didn't notice us, but the sight seemed to cheer up Pershpai. He squeezed my hand tighter, pulling me closer to him. The room was simple. King-size bed, 2 armchairs, TV, and small refrigerator. The room looked clean enough, but it was a little stuffy. The air conditioning had not yet been turned on. I couldn't, and during my resistance, an accident occurred. While I was taking a shower, I was thinking about what to do next. I couldn't call Vineet, that was out of the question. I couldn't call the police or 911, because even the most inexperienced investigator would immediately understand what happened. I couldn't call the motel manager because he would probably call the police. My only hope, albeit illusory, for minimal consequences from this situation is Troy, an ex-convict. I turned off the shower, dried myself, and reached into my purse for my phone. Savitri was under extreme stress after accidentally causing the death of Mr. Patel, the man who was blackmailing her. In a panic, she called her friend Troy, hoping for his help. Troy arrived at the motel and, showing composure and determination, began to eliminate traces of what had happened. He carefully wiped off the prints, packed the body, and called people who were supposed to rid them of the evidence. While cleaning, Savitri realized how far the situation had gone, but her embarrassment was aggravated by the fact that she found herself with practically no clothes. Troy, despite the sensitivity of the situation, acted calmly and professionally. Later, to complete the operation, Troy assigned Savitri to distract the motel manager. She, overcoming her inner doubts and fears, used her charm to hold the young employee's attention, while Troy and his assistants completed the job. Despite the comical moments and tension, Savitri pulled off the task. When everything was finished, Troy took Savitri home. She thanked him for his help, but both knew that their lives would never be the same again. Savitri felt that what happened had forever changed her inner world, forcing her to think about who she really was and how her life could turn upside down so unexpectedly. Savitri felt her world crumbling. Sitting down in a chair in her small apartment, she put her head in her hands. Troy, who was still there, looked at her with a mixture of regret and understanding. He sat down on the sofa opposite and said, "You're not the first to get into this kind of trouble. The main thing is not to panic. It's over. Now it's up to you. You have to convince yourself that this is just a terrible episode from the past." Savitri raised her head, her eyes red from tears. "But this is not just an episode, Troy. This is a reality in which I killed a person. Even if by accident, it doesn't wash off. This is not forgotten." Troy nodded. "It's not forgotten, but you can live with it. We did everything to ensure that no one found anything. Nobody will tie you to this. But you must be strong. You have a husband. You have a life. This is worth getting together for. These words sounded convincing, but Savitri could not believe that she could continue to live as before. She remembered Pershpai's face, his grin, his threats. She remembered how he grabbed her and how it was all over in a split second. She knew she didn't want this, but that didn't make the guilt any less. "Troy, thank you," she finally said. "Without you, I don't know what I would have done." "You are stronger than you think, Savitri," he replied, standing up. "But remember, if they ever start to suspect you, stick to the version we discussed. You just weren't there, and no one can refute this." He started to leave, but stopped at the door. "If you need help, call. Better yet, forget about me. The less you remember about me, the better for you." The next morning, Savitri tried to look normal. She prepared breakfast for Vinit, smiled, and did everything possible so that he would not suspect that anything was wrong. But her hands were shaking slightly, and she could not bring herself to look her husband in the eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked over a cup of tea. "Yes, I'm just tired," she answered, trying to speak calmly. "Jill was so lazy yesterday. I had to work for two." "You work too much. Maybe it's time to get some rest," he suggested. "Yes, maybe," Savitri nodded, although rest was the last thing on her mind. After breakfast, she went to the gas station. Her heart sank when she saw the place where Pershpai usually sat. But now it was empty, and Jill looked at her in surprise. "Did you hear?" Jill asked. "Pershpai has not shown up for work since last night. His family doesn't know where he is either." Savitri tried her best not to show her emotions. "Maybe he left on business. He travels often." "Yes, it's possible. But it's strange that he didn't warn anyone," Jill noted. "This doesn't look like him." Savitri simply nodded and plunged into her work, hoping that she could convince herself that everything was finished. But there was something new inside her: fear, guilt, and a strange feeling that her life would never be the same again. A week later, a police detective came to the gas station asking questions about Pershpai. Savitri saw him from afar and felt cold sweat running down her back. She decided not to approach, but Jill waved her hand. "Savvy, come here. The policeman wants to talk to us." Savitri approached, trying to remain calm. The detective looked at her. "Have you been working here for a long time?" he asked. "Yes, several months," she answered. "When was the last time you saw Mr. Patel?" Savitri hesitated, but remembered Troy's words. "He stopped by last night to check the reports, but left quickly. I think he mentioned something about going to Savannah." The detective nodded, writing her words down on a notepad. "Thank you. If you remember anything, let me know." When he left, Savitri exhaled, but knew that this was just the beginning. The shadow of last night would haunt her, and the more she tried to forget, the more the memories held on to her. After meeting with the detective, Savitri spends the whole day in painful thoughts. Her mind struggles with guilt and fear of exposure. She understands that she cannot hide the truth forever. Every glance of Vinit gives her a painful feeling of lying. Her decision comes at night when she lies awake, listening to her husband breathing calmly next to her. She recalls how Vinit supported her during difficult times and how she always took pride in her honesty. The realization that she betrayed not only her husband, but also herself, becomes unbearable for her. At dawn, while Vinit is still sleeping, she quietly goes into the kitchen and writes everything down in a letter. She writes about her mistake, how she became a victim of blackmail, and how she accidentally caused Pershpai's death. She explains that she wants to confess to prevent anyone else from getting hurt because of her weakness. Savitri wakes up Vinit. He grumbles, dissatisfied that she could let him sleep, but her face immediately attracts his attention. She holds the letter, but decides that she must say everything in person. "Vignette," she begins, trying to keep her voice even. "I need to tell you something. This is important." She pours out the whole truth. About the blackmail, about what happened at the motel, about how Troy helped cover his tracks. Vinit can't speak at first and just looks at her in shock. Then he slowly asks, "Did you kill him?" "It was an accident," she screams through tears. "I didn't want this, Vinit. I tried to protect myself, to protect us." Vineet pulls away, his face turning pale. Were you trying to protect us by hiding it from me, from the police? Savitri begs him to listen to her to the end, but he is already getting out of bed. I need time. He leaves the house, leaving her in tears. The next day, Savitri goes to the police station. Vineet has not returned home, but she decides not to wait. Her recognition is her responsibility. She meets with the detective who came to the gas station. Savitri tells everything that happened, including Pershpai's blackmail. She explains that the death was an accident and provides all the information about how Troy helped her cover her tracks. The detective listens to her carefully, asks questions, and writes down a statement. Do you understand that you can be charged with manslaughter and concealment of evidence? He asks. Yes, I understand, Savitri answers. A few days later, Savitri is detained. She is accused of manslaughter, but her confession and cooperation with the investigation are taken into account. Troy is arrested for covering up evidence of a crime. Vineet returns home after learning about her confession. He finds her letter and comes to the prison to meet her. Why didn't you tell me right away? He asks. I was afraid. I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid that you wouldn't forgive me. Vineet remains silent for a long time and then takes her hands through the glass. I can't understand why you did this. But I love you, and I will wait for you as long as necessary. These words give Savitri hope. At the trial, Savitri shows herself to be sincere and repentant. She accepts the verdict with dignity. Troy, inspired by her action, also decides to fully cooperate with the investigation. His sentence is commuted, and he promises to start a new life. In prison, Savitri finds herself. She becomes a mentor for other female prisoners, helps them study, and supports them in difficult moments. Every day she writes letters to Vineet, who responds with love and patience. A few years later, Savitri was released. She sees Vineet waiting for her at the gate with a smile and a bouquet of flowers. Are you ready to go home? He asks. Yes, I'm ready, she answers, knowing that life has given her a second chance. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.